Hello, I'm Tony Goldstone. So in this video I'm going to talk through the troubleshooting tabs of the spreadsheet if you're struggling to validate. So just very quickly reviewing the first two steps. In step one, you will have put in all of your data about your pension, and this particular member they use their earliest pension statement after 1415, which happened to be 1617. They put in their service. This member also had added years, and they put in their added years data as well as their pay data. And then when they came on to the step 1B TRS validation, they noted that this value didn't match for their latest TRS value, which was 1718. So I'm just going to talk you through the troubleshooting tabs to try and get to the bottom of errors such as this. So principally, your pension is based on two parameters. It's based on your pay and it's based on your service in the legacy schemes. So just breaking down pay slightly more, that also includes whether or not you're less than full-time. So each year your employer will provide the pensions agency a value for your pensionable pay and say whether or not you were full-time or not, and if you were less than full-time, what percentage less than full-time, to allow the pensions agency to calculate your full-time equivalent pay for that year. And similarly, in the legacy scheme, the pensions agency were required to state how many days of service you'd had in that year. And broadly speaking, if those two components are correct, i.e. pay and service, everything should validate. Now, when you put your initial data in on step 1A, you used pay data from your March payslip. And in most cases, this will match the data that's been given to the pensions agency, but there are some circumstances where there may be discrepancies between your end of year pay or your March payslip and the data used by the pensions agency. And that is if they make changes to your pensionable pay after the date that your March payslip has been issued. So common reasons for this include back paid old clinical excellence awards, or changes retrospectively to on-call supplements, or changes to posts with additional responsibility with backdated pay, or any other reasons to change your pay, for example, if you'd been underpaid or overpaid. And similarly, your employer was required to tell the pensions agency whether you're less than full-time, and sometimes there are discrepancies in updating that data. So if you're having problems validating, our recommendation is that you contact the pensions agency, print out this troubleshooter 1, and check that the data that they held for pensionable pay matches the data that you entered in the model. So the data that you entered in the model is usefully on that sheet, so you can check whether or not they match. And I would recommend going back to 1112. And pensions agencies will generally give you this over the phone, but if not, they may need to give it you in writing, but obviously that will lead to some delay. So if you get the value for them, the exact value in pounds and pence of pensionable pay, hopefully this will match the pay data that you've entered. But if it doesn't match, you then need to decide which one do you think is correct. Now, the pensions agency will not be able to correct pay if you say you've got a different value. That would always have to come via your employer. So if you believe that the value that the pensions agency hold is correct, so for example, if they've got later data, if they've made an amendment to a previous tax year, for example, for an over or an underpayment or a retrospective CEA, it's very simple. You can just then simply put the new value back into step 1A, so that it's not the same as your March pay data, but you believe it to be the correct value, and then hopefully the model should validate. Conversely, if you believe that the data on your payslip is correct and the value that NHS pensions hold is incorrect, or any other pensions agency, then you'll need to go back to your employer and ask them to give the updated information to the pensions agency. So similarly, if the pensions agency hold incorrect data for whether or not you're less than full time or not, that would need to feed into here as well, because your pensions in the legacy schemes are based on your full-time equivalent pensionable pay. So if that's incorrect, that will need updating. So that's the first troubleshooter, which was pensionable pay. And then the next troubleshooter is based around pensionable service. And particularly, it's also about trying to help you work through a known issue with IT systems in NHS pensions in England and Wales, around how added years have been calculated, or rather not calculated, since 2015, if you transitioned into the 2015 scheme at that time. So again, the setup here is very similar. This also includes a contract check. So if you have added years, it will tell you the data that you put in. So this example, a consultant started an added years contract age 26 to age 60. They bought 5 years and 243 days at a cost of 5%. And you can check that information with your pensions agency. And based on that, this consultant would expect their service to go up by approximately 61 days per year, because the added years contract continues even after you've transitioned into the 2015 scheme. So again, as per the previous sheet, the amount of service that's in the model is on here, so you can compare that to the values that are given to you by the pensions agency in terms of your 1995 or 2008 service in years and days in this column. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time giving a worked example of the problem with the added years, because that's by far the most common example of issues with pensionable service discrepancy. So if we just go back to the initial minimal data set, and then if we just go back to this particular example of an anonymized TRS. So this consultant has got two TRSs. They've got a TRS from 1617, and they've also got a TRS from 1718. And for the initial data entry, as I said in the initial video, you should always use the earliest TRS statement as close as you can to 1415, but that wasn't available for this particular consultant. So there's a few clues that there's a problem on the TRS itself. So if we look here on the 2015 TRS, we can see here that this consultant earned £103,000 pensionable pay in 1718. And if we go back to 1617, you can see it's £102,000. So 102 in 1617 and 103 in 1718. And if you look over to the 1995 section, you can see that those pays are correct. £103,000 again in 1718 and £102,000 in 1617. But what we also notice is that it says here that it's only been updated to March 2015. And in a way that's not correct, because the pay has been updated, because that 1718 pay has been correctly updated to the 1718 pay data. But what's that referring to is the service. So you'll note that this consultant had added years and they should have got approximately 61 days per year. But if you look at the service here for reckonable membership, this consultant has the same service in both 16, 17, 18 years, 327 days, and also in 17, 18. So as I said, you should use the earliest available document, which is 16, 17. And for that, the service for this consultant was 18 years, 327 days. So if we go back here, this is the 1617 document, which was the earliest one that we have, and we've put in 18 and 327. And then if we go to the validation step, and we change that to the 1617, well, we know that year is going to be correct, because that's the year that we've put our data in for. So we can see here the current value of benefits is 24,131.19 in the 1995 section and 3736.08 in the 2015 section, and that matches there nicely with 24,131.19 and 3736.08. That one's out by a penny, which is perfectly acceptable. But if we then say, well, okay, well, let's see if the 1718 matches. If we go back to this and then change that to 1718. And we can see here that the values of benefits should have gone up to 24,627.63. But on the TRS for 1718, you can see that that's still at 24,412.29. And that's because if you noticed, because this is a consultant with added years in England and Wales, you can see that a red caution box has come up saying that they may not have processed your added years since March 2015. And then this gives you a different value based on that not being uprated. So if you're in that scenario, what you need to do is change this back to 1415. So although the source document was actually 1617, or you could have used the 1718, you should just go back and check it against it having been in 1415, which is when it was last updated by NHS Pensions, and that was 18 years and 327 days of service. So now if we go back to the validation document and we say, okay, well, what should it be against 1718? We can see here we've got a value without the added years, and that should be the correct, not the correct value, the incorrect value that's on the pension savings statement. So we can see here we've got 18 years, 327 days, and a pension of 24,412.29. And if we go back, we see that those figures match this side of it, which is 18 years, 327 days, and 24,412.29. But in fact, had NHS Pensions correctly calculated the TRS for this consultant, they would have also added their added years. So instead of being 18 years, 327 days, it should have been 19 years, 145 days. And therefore the pension, instead of being 24,412, it should have been 25,058. And we've also certainly seen examples where if you do the complex calculations to try and unpick the closing values in pension savings statements, where NHS Pensions have got some of these data incorrect as well and haven't included the added years. So that will all come out if you complete the troubleshooter number 2. So you can see here, this is the correct service with or without added years on this side. And then if you phone up NHS Pensions and ask them to give you the amount of service in years and days that they've calculated on, then that should enable you to see what the correct values are. And finally, Troubleshooter 3 isn't a troubleshooter so much as it's just trying to help people in certain situations, and that situation is that they've come to use the model, and for the first time the model has suggested to them that they've got a tax liability, but they've not yet had any paperwork from their pensions agency. So if we just go and just look at this consultant's particular examples, the easiest way to see the tax liability is in the Growth and Hokey tab, and then this final column here, column W, is the annual allowance tax liability. So you can see that this consultant from 1617 would have his first tax liability, and then he's got increasing tax liabilities every year for his remaining membership. But this consultant said, well, it's 1718 and I've not had any paperwork. And that's because if you look here, this consultant's growth in 1718 is £39,000. And currently NHS Pensions and the other pensions agencies will only send you paperwork if your growth in either scheme or combined is over £40,000. Now clearly that's ridiculous, because many doctors will be tapered by virtue of income that's non-pensionable, and that would mean they would have a reduced annual allowance. So for example, this consultant has got growth of £39,000, but he's also got threshold income over £110,000. So in this example, it's £134,000. And then his adjusted income, which includes that growth of £39,000, is £173,000. So instead of having £40,000 annual allowance, that's been tapered down to £28,000. So this consultant has a liability, but he would have never been able to tell that he's got a liability because he couldn't even calculate his adjusted income without this value here. So the BMA have been lobbying on your behalf that the pensions agencies should be sending everyone on income over £50,000 annual allowance statements every year, so you can't fall into this trap of not knowing you've got a tax liability because you've not been sent the correct paperwork. So if you're in the position where it looks like you've got a tax liability but you haven't got any paperwork, what we recommend you do is ring up your pensions agency. Most of them will generally give you your PIAs or pension inputs amount over the telephone, and your PIAs are all that you need to calculate whether or not you have a tax liability. And you'll have a PIA for your legacy pension, so prior to 2015, that will go all the way back, and you should have a minimum of 7 years data. So don't accept if they say they only want to give you 3 previous years. You should always use a minimum of 7 previous years to calculate if you have a liability, to make sure that you get the most out of the annual allowance carry forward. And you'll do the same for the 2015 scheme and put those values in there. And then you should also check your pensionable salary that they've used as well, to check that against the values that are in the model. And interestingly, we've definitely seen some examples where the pensionable salary that they've used isn't the best of the last 3 years, which should be the basis of which they've calculated your tax liability based on. And that's important because it means that if your pay dips, so for example, if you've had some time out, or if your pay just dips and then gone back up again, they should always use your pensionable salary the best of the last 3 years, and that's the value that's shown here from the model, so that you can compare those. So that's the 3 main troubleshooters that should allow you to try and work out if you've got a discrepancy with your pay, with your service, including the known added years error, or with the fact that you've not received pension saving statements. Thank you very much.